It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, when I married Claire, I thought I had found my forever partner. She was everything I had ever wanted in a wife. Brilliant, creative, beautiful, and full of life. Together, we seemed unstoppable. At least, that's what I told myself. We built what looked like a perfect life. I worked tirelessly in real estate, spending long hours managing properties, closing deals, and expanding my portfolio. Claire, on the other hand, had a keen eye for design. She was passionate about transforming spaces, turning houses into homes. It felt like a natural pairing. Me finding the properties, her breathing life into them. We talked endlessly about our future, dreamed of the places we'd travel, and imagined the family we'd build. But love, as I've come to learn, is not always what it seems. Looking back, the signs were there even from the beginning. Claire's charm, which I had fallen so hard for, often came with an edge. There were moments when her love for beautiful things teetered into an obsession with luxury. She always wanted more, the latest designer bags, five-star vacations, and homes that looked straight out of glossy magazines. At first, I didn't mind. I chalked it up to her appreciation for the finer things in life. I wanted to give her everything she desired. And I did. I worked harder, closed bigger deals, and climbed higher in my career. But no matter how much I achieved, Claire's satisfaction seemed fleeting. She always wanted something else, something more. In those early years, I ignored the subtle cracks. I dismissed the moments when her compliments carried a tinge of criticism. "That suit's nice," she'd say, "but wouldn't Armani look better on you?" Or, "This house is lovely, but imagine if we could afford something twice the size." I brushed it off, eager to keep her happy, believing that her high standards were just part of who she was. Our relationship started to shift when her career in design began to stall. She had incredible talent, no doubt about that, but the business side of things frustrated her. She hated the unpredictability, the hard work that didn't always yield immediate results. And as her enthusiasm for her own career waned, her focus turned more toward mine. "You're doing so well," she'd say with a smile. But then, almost as an afterthought, "Don't you think we could push for more? Bigger investments? Riskier ventures?" She always framed it as support, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was more interested in the rewards than the process. Still, I loved her. Or at least, I loved the version of her I thought I knew. I wanted to believe that we were partners, that we complemented each other perfectly, even as doubts began to creep in. I remember one particular evening vividly. We were sitting in our living room, a cozy fire crackling in the background. I had just closed a deal on a beautiful property in the city, and I was feeling proud. I shared the news with Claire, expecting her to celebrate with me. Instead, she smiled faintly and said, "That's great, but what about the luxury development project? Isn't that where the real money is?" Her words stung, but I hid it well. I told myself she was just being ambitious, pushing me to be better. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that my hard work wasn't enough for her anymore. There were moments, fleeting but real, when I caught glimpses of the Claire I had fallen in love with, the way she'd laugh at one of my stupid jokes or the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about her favorite design projects. Those moments kept me holding on, convincing myself that the distance I felt growing between us was just temporary. But with every passing day, that distance grew. Claire's demands became more specific, her criticism sharper. I started to feel like a means to an end rather than a partner. She wanted the life I could provide, but was she still invested in the life we were supposed to build together? Looking back, it's easy to see how blind I was. I ignored the red flags, choosing instead to focus on the good memories, the promises we had made to each other. I wanted so badly to believe that our marriage was unshakable, that we were as perfect as everyone thought we were. But perfection is often just an illusion, and mine was about to shatter in ways I couldn't have imagined. The cracks in our marriage didn't appear all at once. They crept in, subtle and insidious, like hairline fractures in a glass window. At first, I thought the changes in Claire were temporary. She seemed more irritable, more withdrawn, but I chalked it up to stress or one of the inevitable ebbs and flows in a long-term relationship. I didn't want to believe there was something deeper wrong. But then, The Claire I loved began slipping further and further away. It started with little things, moments so small I barely noticed them at the time. She stopped waiting for me to have dinner together, often claiming she wasn't hungry or had already eaten. She began staying out late, attending networking events, or meeting friends for drinks, though she rarely invited me to join. Her phone became her constant companion, always buzzing with messages she'd check and quickly put away. If I asked about it, she'd wave me off with a dismissive, "It's nothing important." Even when she was home, it felt like she wasn't really there. The warmth that once defined her was replaced by cold indifference. Her compliments turned into critiques. "Do you really think that tie works with that shirt?" she'd ask, her tone more condescending than curious. Or, "You always order the same thing at restaurants. Don't you ever want to try something different?" At first, I tried harder. I adjusted my schedule to spend more time with her, planned date nights, and surprised her with little gestures. A bouquet of her favorite flowers, tickets to an art exhibit she'd mentioned, even a weekend getaway. Each time, she smiled politely, thanked me, and returned to her detached, distant self. The Claire who used to light up at my smallest efforts now seemed bored by everything I did. I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe I'd become too predictable, too focused on work. I started questioning every decision I made, wondering if I was the reason she was pulling away. But no matter how much effort I put into rekindling the spark, it never seemed to reach her. It was like pouring water into a sieve. Nothing I did could fill the growing void between us. The arguments started soon after. They were never explosive. Claire wasn't one for shouting matches, but her words carried a sharpness that cut just as deep. "You're so focused on work," she'd say. "Do you even know what I want anymore?" I'd try to respond, to ask what I could do differently, but she'd brush me off with a sigh and leave the room. Other times, her criticisms were more direct. "You're so predictable," she said one night as we sat in the living room. "Everything about you is safe and boring. Don't you ever want more out of life?" The comment hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. "I thought we wanted the same things," I said quietly. "I thought we were building a life together." She didn't respond. Instead, she stared at the fireplace, her expression unreadable. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument could have. I began to notice other changes, too. Claire, who had once taken pride in the projects she worked on, stopped talking about her designs. She used to show me sketches and color swatches, excitedly explaining her ideas. Now, she barely mentioned her work, and when I asked about it, she'd shrug and change the subject. Her focus seemed to shift entirely to material things: luxury handbags, designer clothes, expensive dinners at restaurants where the wine list was longer than the menu. She wanted a lifestyle that was flashy and glamorous, one that showcased wealth and status. And she made it clear, in her own subtle way, that our current life wasn't enough. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Every conversation felt like a minefield, every decision a potential trigger for her frustration. The warmth, the laughter, the partnership that had defined our early years together, it was all slipping away, replaced by an icy distance that I didn't know how to bridge. Still, I held on. I told myself that every marriage goes through rough patches, that this was just one of ours. I convinced myself that if I worked harder, tried harder, loved harder, we could fix things. After all, we had built a life together. Surely that counted for something. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Claire wasn't just unhappy. She was pulling away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the woman I had married. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to stop it. I came home one evening, exhausted after a long day at work, to find Claire sitting at the kitchen table. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or flipping through one of her design magazines like she usually did. Instead, she sat stiffly, her hands clasped in front of her, her face unreadable. "Nathan," she said, her voice calm but cold, "we need to talk." My heart sank. Those words never heralded anything good. I set my bag down, trying to mask my unease. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. She didn't mince words. "I can't stand you anymore," she said, her tone devoid of emotion. This marriage, this life, it's suffocating me. I stared at her, stunned. What are you talking about? Claire, we can work through this? No, Nathan, she interrupted sharply, her eyes narrowing. We can't. I'm done pretending. I've been unhappy for years, and I can't do this anymore. Her words felt like a punch to the gut, but what she said next knocked the wind out of me entirely. I'm moving in with Alex. I blinked, confused. Alex? Who the hell is Alex? She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. He's someone who actually understands me, someone who gives me what I need. Unlike you. My chest tightened. How long has this been going on? Does it matter? She snapped. The point is, I'm leaving. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her, trying to process what I was hearing. The woman I had loved, the woman I had worked so hard to make happy, was standing in front of me, not just admitting to an affair but throwing it in my face as if it were nothing. She got up from the table and began gathering her things, her movements deliberate and methodical. I've already packed most of my stuff, she said, her voice as casual as if she were discussing the weather. I just need a few more things, and then I'll be out of your way. I followed her into the living room, my mind racing. Claire, wait, can we at least talk about this? Figure out what went wrong. She stopped and turned to face me, her expression one of pure disdain. What went wrong? She repeated, laughing bitterly. You went wrong, Nathan. You're boring, predictable, safe. I want excitement, passion, a life worth living. And you? You're like a reliable old truck. Useful, sure, but who dreams of driving one? Her words cut deeper than any knife ever could. I felt my fists clench at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. I gave you everything, I said quietly, my voice trembling. I worked hard to build a life for us. For you. And I never asked you to, she shot back. All I ever wanted was a life that felt alive. And Alex gives me that. She turned away and resumed packing, leaving me standing there, stunned and silent. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to make her see what she was throwing away. But I knew it was pointless. Her mind was made up. When she finally left, slamming the door behind her, the house fell into an eerie silence. I stood in the empty living room, staring at the space where she had just been, feeling a mix of heartbreak and fury. The life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, had just been discarded as if they meant nothing. For hours, I sat in that silence, replaying her words over and over in my head. I'm moving in with Alex. You're boring. I can't stand you anymore. Eventually, I got up and walked into our bedroom. Or rather, what used to be our bedroom. Her side of the closet was empty, the drawers she used to fill with her things now bare. On the nightstand, she had left her wedding ring, its gold band gleaming under the soft glow of the lamp. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, and felt a wave of anger rise within me. This wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the way she had dismissed me, belittled me, and made me feel like I was nothing. I clenched the ring in my fist and took a deep breath. I didn't know who Alex was, but I knew one thing. He wasn't getting away with this. Neither of them were. The days following Claire's departure were a haze of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. I replayed every conversation, every argument, every subtle shift in her demeanor, trying to piece together where things had gone wrong. But the truth was, I already knew. Claire hadn't just grown apart from me. She had made a deliberate choice to betray me. It wasn't enough for her to leave. She had to insult me on her way out, making me feel small and insignificant. And Alex, the man she had so casually thrown into my life without warning, was a complete mystery. Who was he? Where had he come from? And what was it about him that made Claire believe he could offer her something better than what we had built together? The silence in the house was unbearable. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of her. The framed photos on the walls, the throw pillows she had insisted on buying, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I couldn't stand it. I threw myself into work, hoping the distractions would keep the pain at bay, but the questions still gnawed at me. One evening, after another sleepless night, I decided I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. I needed answers. Claire might have walked out without looking back, but I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I had spent years building a life for us. She didn't get to throw it away without explanation. I started with the basics. Claire hadn't hidden Alex from me completely. She'd been too arrogant for that. She dropped his name like a trophy during her departure, confident that I wouldn't, or couldn't, do anything about it. But she underestimated me. With a little digging, I found him. Alex was exactly the type of man Claire would gravitate toward. Flashy, charming, and dripping with the kind of overconfidence that masks deeper insecurities. His social media was a curated shrine to his own ego. Photos of expensive cars, lavish dinners, and luxury vacations, all carefully crafted to project an image of success. But it didn't take long to uncover the truth. Alex wasn't the wealthy entrepreneur he pretended to be. He was renting the cars, financing the vacations with borrowed money, and living in a house that didn't even belong to him. In fact, the house he was renting was listed under a real estate company I owned. At first, I didn't believe it. I double-checked the records, scouring through the details of my property portfolio. But there it was in black and white. Alex was renting one of the houses managed by my company. He had no idea that the very roof over his head was tied to me. The irony of it all was almost too much. Claire, who had left me for a man she believed could offer her the life she craved, had unknowingly moved into a house I owned. It was poetic justice, served up on a silver platter. My initial reaction was rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. The audacity of it all was staggering. Claire had mocked me, belittled me, and walked away as if she were upgrading her life, only to land herself in a situation that was entirely dependent on me. But as the anger subsided, it was replaced by something else. Clarity. I saw an opportunity, a way to regain control of a situation that had left me feeling powerless. Claire and Alex thought they had outsmarted me, but they didn't realize the game had just begun. I decided to let things play out for a while. Claire wanted a new life with Alex? Fine. But she was going to learn that betrayal has consequences. I wasn't going to lash out in anger or make reckless decisions. I was going to be deliberate, calculated, and patient. That night, as I stared at the lease agreement with my company's name at the top, I felt the first spark of satisfaction I'd experienced since Claire walked out. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my sense of control. Claire and Alex had made their choices. Now it was time for them to face the fallout. The realization that Alex's home was tied to my real estate company had given me the clarity I needed to move forward. For days, I carefully reviewed the lease agreement, searching for anything I could use to my advantage. And then, I found it, a non-compliance clause buried in the fine print. It was standard legal jargon, but in this case, it was the key to everything. The clause allowed me to terminate the lease if certain conditions weren't met, and as luck would have it, Alex had already violated several of them. Late payments, unauthorized modifications to the property, and a string of complaints from neighbors. All of it gave me the legal grounds to act. Claire and Alex had no idea that their new beginning was built on a foundation I could crumble with a single phone call. But I didn't rush. I wanted to make sure every piece of this plan was perfectly in place. If Claire and Alex thought they had one, I wanted them to feel that way for just a little longer. Let them settle in, bask in their supposed victory. The fall would be that much sweeter when it came. I reached out to my property manager, Mark, a no-nonsense professional who handled all the day-to-day operations for my properties. Mark, I said, keeping my tone casual, I need you to terminate the lease on 217 Willow Lane. He hesitated, clearly surprised. That's a bit abrupt, Nathan. Is there a particular reason? Let's just say the tenants aren't exactly who they claim to be, I replied. They've violated multiple terms of the agreement, and I'd prefer to cut ties sooner rather than later. Mark didn't press for details. He trusted my judgment and agreed to handle the process swiftly. Within hours, notices were drafted, paperwork was prepared, and the legal wheels were set in motion. As I waited for the fallout to begin, I kept up appearances. Claire continued sending occasional texts, mostly about the divorce proceedings, and I responded politely, giving her no reason to suspect anything was amiss. She was cordial, even smug, as though she believed she was firmly in control of the situation. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance as she and Alex posted pictures of their new life together on social media. Lavish dinners, weekend getaways, and candid moments in the living room of my house. Each post was a reminder of their arrogance, their complete ignorance of the storm that was about to hit. A week later, I received confirmation from Mark that the termination notice had been delivered. Claire and Alex now had 30 days to vacate the property. It was a small window, and I knew it would send their carefully constructed plans into chaos. The first sign of panic came in the form of a voicemail from Claire. Her voice, usually so composed, was tinged with desperation. "Nathan, can you call me back? Something's happening with the house, and I need to talk to you." I let it go unanswered. The next day, she called again, this time sounding more frantic. "Nathan, please, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Again, I ignored her. By the third day, the panic in her voice was palpable. "Nathan," she said, her tone trembling, "we're being told we have to leave the house. I don't understand what's going on. Please call me back." This time, I answered. "Hello, Claire," I said, my voice calm and measured. "What seems to be the problem?" Her relief was audible. "Nathan, thank God. The landlord is saying the lease is being terminated. They're claiming violations, but that doesn't make any sense. Can you help me figure this out?" I paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then, I said the words I had been waiting to say. "Oh, Claire," I began, my tone almost mocking. "Didn't Alex tell you? I'm the landlord." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I own the house, Claire," I said bluntly. "The lease is in my company's name. You and Alex violated the terms, so I'm terminating it. You have 30 days to move out." Her gasp was almost satisfying. "You're lying," she spat, but there was no conviction in her voice. I calmly sent her a copy of the lease agreement, highlighting my company's name at the top. A moment later, I heard her phone chime. "Check your inbox," I said. The silence that followed was priceless. For the first time in months, Claire had no words. The moment Claire realized I wasn't bluffing was one I wouldn't forget. Her stunned silence on the phone was almost comical, and when she finally managed to speak, her voice was shaky, stripped of the confidence she had once wielded so casually. This isn't fair," she stammered. "You can't just kick us out." "Actually, I can," I replied, my tone cold but calm. "You violated the terms of the lease. Legally, this is entirely within my rights. I suggest you start packing." Claire's protests grew louder, more frantic, but I was done entertaining her excuses. I hung up the phone, letting her stew in the chaos she had brought upon herself. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. After months of betrayal and heartbreak, I finally had the upper hand. Over the next few days, the fallout from the lease termination began to unfold. Alex, who had always projected an image of confidence and control, was now scrambling to figure out their next move. According to Mark, he had shown up at the property management office, demanding to speak with someone about the misunderstanding. Mark, ever professional, informed him that the decision was final and non-negotiable. Claire's attempts to contact me didn't stop. She called, texted, and even emailed, each message more desperate than the last. "Nathan, please, let's talk about this," one message read. "We need more time. This isn't just about me. It's about Alex too. You don't have to do this." But I did, and I wasn't about to back down. I kept tabs on their situation through mutual acquaintances and, admittedly, a bit of social media stalking. The glossy images of their so-called perfect life had stopped abruptly, replaced by radio silence. It was clear that things were falling apart, and I couldn't deny the satisfaction it brought me. One evening, I received a call from Chris, a close friend who had been by my side throughout this ordeal. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to contain his amusement. "Alex was ranting at the bar last night about how his landlord from hell ruined his life." I almost spilled my drink laughing. I chuckled, the mental image of Alex's tantrum bringing a rare moment of levity. "He doesn't know the half of it," I said, shaking my head. Chris hesitated for a moment before adding, "You know, Nathan, this is more than just payback. This is you taking control of your life again. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth. Claire and Alex had tried to reduce me to a stepping stone, a means to their selfish ends, but they had underestimated me. As the eviction date approached, I could sense the growing tension in their camp. Mutual friends mentioned that Claire and Alex were struggling to find a new place on such short notice. Their reputation as reliable tenants had been tarnished, thanks to the lease violations, and their finances weren't as secure as they had let on. On the day they were supposed to vacate, I received one final call from Claire. Her voice was different this time, quieter, more subdued. "Nathan," she said, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to ask if she was sorry for what she had done, or if she was just sorry it hadn't worked out the way she'd planned. But in the end, I simply said, "It's too late, Claire." And it was. The locks were changed that evening, and the house that had briefly been their sanctuary was no longer theirs. Alex, who had promised Claire a life of luxury and excitement, was left scrambling for a new plan. Their relationship, built on lies and betrayal, couldn't withstand the pressure. It crumbled like the fragile facade it had always been. As for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. For the first time since Claire walked out, I wasn't consumed by anger or sadness. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't looking back. The fallout from the eviction unfolded with a predictability that was almost poetic. Claire and Alex, who had flaunted their so-called perfect new life, were now scrambling to salvage what little dignity they had left. Mutual friends and acquaintances whispered about the spectacle, how they were couch surfing, calling in favors, and desperately trying to find a new place to live. Alex's facade of success crumbled under scrutiny. The man who had promised Claire a life of luxury was exposed for what he truly was: a fraud. His bravado disappeared, replaced by frustration and desperation as he tried to hold their unraveling situation together. It was clear their relationship, built on lies and betrayal, was under immense strain. Claire, on the other hand, was uncharacteristically quiet. The confident, dismissive woman who had walked out of my life now appeared lost and uncertain. Her messages to me became sporadic, but the tone was unmistakable: regret. One afternoon, I received a text from her. "Nathan, I know you probably hate me, but I just want to say I'm sorry. I never meant for things to turn out like this. Please, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment before locking my phone and putting it aside. Claire's apology, whether genuine or self-serving, didn't matter anymore. I had no interest in rehashing the past or giving her the closure she sought. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Meanwhile, I focused on tying up the final loose ends. The lease termination had gone smoothly, and the property was back on the market. It didn't take long to find new tenants, people who valued and respected the home. Unlike Claire and Alex, seeing the house transformed into a space filled with potential and positivity felt like another victory, a symbolic end to that chapter of my life. But the true moment of satisfaction came when I learned about the state of Claire and Alex's relationship. According to Chris, who had a knack for keeping tabs on gossip, things were falling apart faster than anyone had expected. Apparently, Alex's big plans for their future didn't include having to pay for everything himself, Chris said during one of our catch-ups. Claire's realizing he's not the knight in shining armor she thought he was. I couldn't help but laugh. "So much for their fresh start," I said, shaking my head. Chris leaned back in his chair, grinning. "You know, I think you handled this whole thing perfectly. You didn't lose your cool. You didn't stoop to their level. You just let the truth do all the work." He was right. As much as I had wanted revenge in the beginning, my actions had never been about pettiness or spite. They were about reclaiming my power and ensuring that neither Claire nor Alex could walk away unscathed after what they had done. In the weeks that followed, I began to feel a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. The betrayal that had once consumed me now felt distant, like a storm that had passed. I no longer cared about what Claire thought or how Alex was faring. Their drama was their own, and I had no intention of being drawn back into it. One evening, As I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with another message from Claire. This time, it was an email. Nathan, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how sorry I am. I let my greed and arrogance ruin everything. Alex isn't who I thought he was, and I see now what a mistake I made. I'll regret losing you for the rest of my life. Claire. I read it once, then again, before closing it and setting my phone aside. There was no anger, no bitterness, just indifference. Her words, though laden with regret, held no power over me anymore. Claire's apology was a reflection of her own guilt, not a bridge to reconciliation. As the sky darkened, I realized how far I had come. The man who once felt broken and betrayed was now whole again, stronger and wiser for the experience. Claire and Alex's betrayal had once defined my pain, but now it was nothing more than a footnote in the story of my life. I leaned back in my chair, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The world felt open and full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. The days of chaos and heartbreak were firmly behind me now. The lease termination, the fallout for Claire and Alex, and the finality of my decisions had closed a chapter one once thought would haunt me forever. What surprised me most wasn't just the relief I felt. It was the sheer clarity that came with knowing I had truly moved on. Claire's attempts at reconciliation had all but ceased. Her last email, dripping with regret, had gone unanswered, and I hadn't heard from her since. Mutual friends occasionally dropped tidbits about her struggles, how Alex had finally left her, how she was piecing together a life she never expected to have to rebuild. But it was all white noise to me now. She no longer occupied the space in my mind she once had. The divorce was finalized shortly after the lease debacle, and I walked away with everything I had fought for. The house, the financial stability, and most importantly, my dignity, remained intact. I had taken precautions during the proceedings to ensure Claire couldn't exploit me further, and those efforts paid off. While she left with little more than what the law required, I gained something infinitely more valuable: peace of mind. With the legal battles behind me, I turned my focus inward. For years, I had poured my energy into providing for Claire, shaping our life together, and making sacrifices to keep our relationship afloat. Now, I could finally redirect that energy toward myself. The house, once a place filled with painful memories, underwent a transformation. I redecorated the living room, painted the walls a fresh shade of blue, and replaced every piece of furniture that reminded me of her. The garden, which Claire had always ignored, became my sanctuary. I spent hours tending to the plants, finding solace in the simplicity of nurturing something and watching it grow. Each bloom felt like a small victory, a testament to resilience and renewal. Friends and family rallied around me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Chris, always quick with a sarcastic quip, became my sounding board, offering equal parts humor and wisdom. My sister invited me to family dinners, her kids' laughter reminding me of the joy I still had in my life. Slowly but surely, the void left by Claire's betrayal was filled with love, support, and the realization that I was never truly alone. I also began exploring interests I had long neglected. Photography, a hobby I had dabbled in years ago, became a newfound passion. I spent weekends exploring the countryside, capturing landscapes and candid moments that reminded me of the beauty in the world. Hiking became another outlet. Each climb to the summit felt like a metaphor for my journey, the effort and struggle rewarded by breathtaking views. Therapy played a crucial role in my healing. Dr. Miller, a sharp and empathetic therapist, helped me process the anger, sadness, and confusion that had once consumed me. She encouraged me to examine not just the betrayal, but the patterns in my life that allowed it to take such a toll. Forgiveness isn't about excusing their actions, she said during one session. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. Those words stayed with me. Forgiveness didn't mean letting Claire or Alex back into my life. It meant letting go of the power they once held over me. And as the weeks turned into months, I felt that weight lifting. The anger and bitterness faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of what had happened and a firm resolve to never let it define me. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Chris joined me with a couple of beers. We talked about everything and nothing: work, sports, his latest misadventures. At one point, he raised his bottle in a toast. "To you, Nathan," he said, grinning, "for proving that you can come out of a storm stronger than you went in." I clinked my bottle against his, smiling. "To moving forward," I replied. And that's exactly what I was doing. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. The pain of betrayal had been a heavy burden, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. It forced me to confront my own worth, to reevaluate my priorities, and to build a life that was truly my own. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I realized that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Claire and Alex were a chapter in my story, but they were far from the whole book. The next chapters were mine to write, and I was determined to fill them with joy, resilience, and authenticity. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly at peace. The divorce was finalized, and with that, the last official tie between Claire and me was severed. Sitting in the courtroom as the judge declared our marriage legally dissolved, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was something quieter, deeper. A chapter of my life that had caused so much pain was finally closed. Claire hadn't contested anything during the proceedings. Perhaps she knew she had no ground to stand on. Her once bold attempts to portray herself as the victim had faded into resignation. As I walked out of the courthouse, I glanced back briefly and saw her sitting there, her expression unreadable. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't looking back. The weeks that followed were liberating. For the first time in years, I felt truly free to live my life on my terms. There was no tension hanging over my head, no walking on eggshells to avoid arguments, and no pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. The house, once a symbol of heartbreak, had transformed into a haven, a place where I could focus on rebuilding myself. With the divorce behind me, I began investing more time in the things that truly mattered. My relationships with family and friends deepened, their unwavering support reminding me of the love and connection I had overlooked during my marriage. Chris remained a constant source of humor and perspective, dragging me out of the house when I needed a nudge and reminding me that life was meant to be lived, not just endured. One afternoon, as I sorted through some old belongings, I came across a photo album from the early days of my marriage to Claire. I hesitated for a moment before flipping it open. The images stared back at me, smiling faces, shared adventures, and moments that felt like they belonged to a different life. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for Claire, but for the dreams we had once shared. But as I closed the album and set it aside, I realized those dreams had been built on a foundation that was never as solid as I'd thought. And that was okay. Meanwhile, word of Claire's struggles trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances. Her relationship with Alex had crumbled under the weight of their betrayal, the glamour of their new life quickly giving way to reality. Alex, the man who had promised her everything, had left her to fend for herself. She was reportedly living with a relative, trying to rebuild her life from scratch. I didn't feel pity or satisfaction, just a sense of detachment. Her choices had led her here, and she was living with the consequences. My own journey was one of rebuilding, too, but in a completely different sense. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my growth, helping me unpack not just the pain of the betrayal but the patterns in my life that had allowed me to stay in a toxic relationship for so long. Dr. Miller encouraged me to focus on the future, to set goals that excited and challenged me. And so I did. I threw myself into work, but this time, it wasn't about burying myself in distraction. I took on projects that inspired me, revitalizing properties and working with clients who shared my vision. Photography remained a passion, and I found myself planning trips to capture landscapes I had only dreamed of seeing before. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a testament to the life I was building on my own terms. One evening, as I walked through the garden I had so carefully nurtured, I reflected on how far I had come. The flowers, vibrant and thriving, were a mirror of my own journey, proof that growth was possible even in the wake of devastation. I sat on the bench, the cool evening air wrapping around me, and let out a long, steady breath. Claire's betrayal had once been the focal point of my life, consuming my thoughts and emotions. But now, It felt like a distant memory, a storm that had passed, leaving the skies clear and bright. I no longer cared about her regrets or Alex's downfall. Their story was theirs to deal with. Mine was about moving forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in a warm, golden glow, I realized that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, it had all been a catalyst for something greater. I had found myself again, stronger and more resilient than ever before. This was my life now, and it was one I was proud to call my own. The final chapter of this journey wasn't one of triumph or revenge. It was one of quiet resolution and renewal. After months of turmoil, self-reflection, and rebuilding, I had reached a place of peace. The pain that once consumed me had become a memory, a scar that reminded me of my resilience rather than my wounds. Claire was no longer a presence in my life. The finality of the divorce, the separation of our lives, and the silence that followed had created the distance I needed to truly move on. Occasionally, I would hear whispers about her from mutual acquaintances, how she was struggling to find work, how she had moved into a small apartment, how her once bright confidence had dimmed. But these snippets of her life didn't stir anything within me. Not pity, not anger, not satisfaction, just indifference. As for Alex, he had faded into obscurity. His promises of luxury and excitement had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors, and without Claire to bolster his facade, he had disappeared from the social circles he once flaunted. His downfall had been inevitable, but by the time it happened, I barely noticed. My focus was no longer on them. It was on me. Life after Claire was simpler, quieter, and infinitely more fulfilling. The house I had once shared with her had been transformed into a home that reflected who I truly was. The walls were adorned with photographs I had taken on my travels, each one capturing a moment of beauty and freedom. The garden, now thriving, was a sanctuary where I spent hours lost in thought or simply enjoying the stillness. My career, once a source of stress and endless hustle, became something I genuinely enjoyed again. I took on projects that challenged and excited me, working with clients who shared my vision and passion. It was no longer about proving myself or chasing success. It was about doing what I loved and finding fulfillment in the process. But the most profound changes were within me. Therapy had been a cornerstone of my healing, helping me navigate the complex emotions that came with betrayal and loss. Through those sessions, I learned to forgive, not Claire or Alex, but myself. I forgave myself for not seeing the red flags, for staying in a relationship that had been toxic long before it ended, and for doubting my own worth in the aftermath. That forgiveness allowed me to embrace the future with an open heart. I reconnected with old friends, rebuilt relationships that had faded during my marriage, and surrounded myself with people who valued and supported me. Chris, ever the loyal and sarcastic friend, remained a constant source of humor and encouragement. My family, especially my sister, reminded me of the strength in unconditional love. One evening, as I stood in the garden watching the sun set, I reflected on how far I had come. The man who had once been broken by betrayal was now standing tall, not as a victim but as someone who had chosen to rise above the pain. Claire and Alex had been a chapter in my story, but they weren't the defining one. Their betrayal had taught me lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of boundaries, lessons I carried with me into this new phase of my life. I no longer needed closure from Claire or justice against Alex. The life I was building was the only closure I needed. It was a life filled with authenticity, joy, and a deep appreciation for the simple things I had once taken for granted. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, I raised a glass to the future, a future that was entirely mine to create. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. They were reminders of my strength, proof that even in the face of betrayal, I had chosen to rebuild, to grow, and to thrive. This was my new beginning, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free.